one of the concepts I think is interesting is sort of this idea of repositioning, your assets, and the fact that there's this distinction between countable versus non-countable assets. I mean, it seems like there must be quite a few strategies that simply involve taking, if you have something like cash or stocks or something, just simply using those to acquire things that are non-countable. Like, if the equity in the house doesn't count and the house needs a new roof, I mean, that's the time to do it because you're going to lose that cash anyway.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So that's how it starts is, in a sense, if you have debts, you can just simply pay off the debt. In that sense, you're kind of accelerating something that will have to be done eventually to right now as part of your spend down strategy. So that one half of the countable assets that has to be spent down to $2,400, put a new roof on the house if it needs it. Maybe the spouse who's staying there is also getting older, could use some modifications to the house to make it better for aging in place for that person. So, putting in ramps or grab bars
Right.
in the bathrooms and things like that. You can, I think you mentioned, buying something that is a non-countable asset. So putting money into a reserved account for prepaid funeral planning or burial expenses. You can do that, and that's not considered holding money that could otherwise be used for your care. Sometimes people even talk about having caregiver agreements with a friend or a child, one of their children, where you have a whole agreement about that you're going to compensate them because you need to spend the money and you might need care provided beyond what is provided in the nursing home, even if it's just running errands, or there are certain things that are allowed and certain things that are not allowed. But there are services that can be provided by a friend or family member as long as you compensate them. That gets a little weird with the conversation because many children will say, well, you're not going to pay me to take care of my parent. That's what we do. And I get that, but you have to convince them this is actually very good in order to get Medicaid for your parent. So there's some pluses and minuses of doing the caregiver agreement, but that's another option to spend down money. Legal fees to get the advice to navigate all of this can be deducted as an expense. So there's a number of ways to do spend down. And ultimately, if you just can't cover the distance between, let's say we cut it into 150 and 150 and we have to get one side down to 2,400, if you just can't get down to 2,400 with this kind of spend down techniques, we usually cover the remaining distance by turning assets, which we've talked about, into income, which we've talked about. So let's say, since we already discussed how the community spouse, the person who's not going into care, can have a lot of income and it's not going to affect the eligibility of the spouse going into care, well, we can take excess assets and buy an annuity that immediately starts paying back a check once a month for a certain period of time. And that money goes to the community spouse as income, which they're allowed to have. So you've turned an asset you're not allowed to have into income, which you are allowed to have. And this is the point in the conversation where people look at us and they say, is this legal? And it is. I assure you, this is written right into the law. This is, the Medicaid officials themselves will tell you this is an acceptable strategy.
Right. Well, and that's interesting. I mean, it does seem like, two of the things that pop up if you start, searching for, Medicaid information are always going to be this notion of gifting and annuities. And I think a lot of people have actually heard of those two concepts independently. And, what are some of the pitfalls to somebody that's trying to employ one of those strategies on their own versus contacting a elder law attorney and making sure that they're complying with all of these rules?
Right. Well, a lot of people don't even know that gifting is a complex and problematic issue when it comes to needing long-term care. So when you apply for Medicaid and we put together an application, we send people on a paper chase from the beginning. So we need 5 years of bank statements. We need 5 years of tax records, and we're going to go line by line through them just because we know that the Medicaid agency officials will do the same thing. And what we're looking for is transfers of money. If you transfer money to another person in the 5-year period before you apply for Medicaid, then that's treated as a gift. It's a transfer for less than fair market value. So, whether people know it or not, they're giving money for, a wedding gift, or they're giving it for this reason or that reason. And you can't simply say to the Medicaid people, well, I didn't do this so I could qualify for Medicaid, because if it were that easy, everybody would do that. So although it's true, it's just very hard to prove. So if you give a birthday gift or a Christmas gift every year in the same amount to the same people, then, an argument can be made to the Medicaid agency that this was obviously a regular and persistent gift. They weren't doing it to draw their resources down and become eligible for Medicaid. And normally the response is, we get it, we'll overlook that one. But for the most part, gifting is problematic. We have to look back 5 years. In Pennsylvania, as long as the gifting in a given month is under about $500, we're okay. But if we start seeing $700 in a month, if we start seeing, more than that in a month, large gifts, that all has to be added up, and it results in a penalty period. And what the penalty period means is there's a way we calculate it based on the average cost of care per day. So that, and then how much you gave away, and you use those two numbers to figure out how many days of private pay at that $10,000, $12,000 a month rate you're going to have to pay before Medicaid will start paying. So gifting is to be looked at very, very cautiously if you think that long-term care might be in your future. Now, all that being said, gifting is also part of our spend down strategy. So again, if we, not to make you totally confused, but if we get to that point where we just can't spend down your money to the eligibility point of $2,400 in assets, and I talked about the annuity is usually done, it's sometimes called the half a loaf strategy. There's other names for it, but what we'll do is make a gift, and that's keeping money. Remember, the whole goal here is to keep as much money in the family as possible, especially if the spouse in the community might need care eventually themselves. So right. we would make a gift of that money, knowing that we're drawing a penalty that I just described. But then the annuity payments that come in month after month will cover the cost of your care at the high private pay rate for the length of the penalty. And so that's how one takes care of the other. So the gifting and the annuity strategies work together. But I would really prefer if people leave that to us as a carefully thought out plan, as opposed to just giving away their money and thinking, whether it's because they don't know better or because they think they're being clever and they give away a house for $500, that's a gift, and a substantial one that will result in a penalty.
Right. I mean, my guess is probably the two most common mistakes people are making is one, gifting without any professional advice and probably not employing it in a sound way. And then two, my guess is many of those people, when they fill out that Medicaid application, are also making mistakes in terms of what they're reporting and disclosing, and you can get in a lot of trouble for that as well.
Absolutely. There's criminal penalties for not doing that right. So and there we're talking about, well, they'll never know about this gift, or, I was clever about how I did it. They will know, because they're searching high and low in your records, and you don't want to get caught with Medicaid fraud. Every state actually has, and usually in their state attorney general's office, has a Medicaid fraud control section. That's the language under the federal law. And so they will find you, and you don't want them to find you. So Don't try to hide assets.
Yeah. And another overarching theme here is, I think, a misconception, not about Medicaid planning strategy, but just about the concept itself is, I think some people think, that in doing this, you're trying to get away with something in order to qualify for Medicaid sooner. But my sense is, in most cases, preserving assets, you're really just acting in your own and your family's best interest, because in addition to trying to possibly preserve some assets for your spouse or even your children, as you mentioned earlier, Medicaid doesn't cover everything. And so, just because you qualify for Medicaid, if you don't have any other assets, you might not be receiving the best care. And perhaps, an extra few $1,000s could make a significant difference in the quality of care you're receiving, if you can afford to buy some additional care you need, or buy an additional piece of medical equipment that's not covered. A lot of people are overlooking that side of this as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, if we're talking about whether this is, people can quibble about whether this policy makes sense, that this is really the safety net for the middle class. Many people thought that the rise of long-term care insurance would be the solution to this crushing expense that will wipe out the savings of many middle class families. But it kind of fizzled out as unworkable and just really hasn't been the answer. And Medicaid continues to be the answer for families. So, we can talk about whether it's the right policy, but if you think about very similarly situated neighbors on the same street, one person could, have a heart attack and go into the hospital and need heart surgery and be in the hospital for, a few weeks, and then maybe need a short rehab stay to rehab from that experience. And Medicare will pay for the whole thing. But then if the neighbor gets dementia and needs to go into a nursing home for a long period of time, that person's going to have to spend their life savings. So, and then there could be the person on the next street over who just, because of lifestyle choices with food or alcohol or whatever it might be, they just never saved any money at all. Well, the government's just going to pay for everything for them because they have no money. And so they become qualified for Medicaid right away. So why would that middle one, be penalized for doing what they do, what everybody does with tax planning, going to a professional who can say, well, the law says you're allowed to do the following to keep from paying too much. So that's what we're going to do. I mean, Medicaid planning is about following what the law allows, and the law allows that, this Medicaid planning, because there are other circumstances where people are having completely different treatment as far as our healthcare system goes. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but it is what the law allows, and there are awfully good arguments for it.